This year, TYT's been making a lot of moves. Now you can too. Now, how are you going to do that? You want to launch a new business? That sounds fun. You're going to change careers? Geez, and Lord mercy. You're going to need a website for all that. Lucky for you, Squarespace also making moves. You're going to go to squarespace.com/TYT. You're going to get 10% off your first purchase, and you're going to get to build anything you want on that website with a unique domain. What are you, crazy? Go do it now. Go.
Hey TYT, I'm Nomiki Konst here at the YouTube Spaces, also a New York diner in New York City, where we have the pleasure of speaking with Charles Alexander, who was a longtime Time Inc., Time Magazine writer and editor for 23 years, covered everything from business to science to international editing, and it wrote a great piece in The Nation a few weeks ago talking about the purchase of the famous Time Magazine. And he's brought several copies that have gotten a lot of attention over the years that probably won't get the same type of reporting with the new owners of Time Inc. So Charles, thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me, Nomi.
Absolutely. So what does this all mean? I mean, I have to ask, the Koch brothers are involved with this deal.
Right.
They've put $650 million of their own money into this Meredith Inc. deal.
Right.
But, you know, most people I know, probably under a certain age, aren't subscribing to Time anymore. They might be reading it online, but they're not, you know, purchasing it and getting it delivered to their homes. Does this even matter?
I think so, Nomi. Obviously, Time doesn't have the influence it once has, but there are still 3 million subscribers. It's still one of the great franchises in journalism. And at least once a year, people pay attention. You held up this magazine, the Person of the Year, the Silence Breakers, Ashley Judd, and other women who have come forward and told their stories of sexual harassment. I think this was a very good issue and a very good choice. And of course, it made the news because our president was apparently disappointed that he wasn't going to be the Person of the Year for the second year in a row, and so he preemptively put out a tweet that said something. Well, they wanted to interview me as a runner-up, but I said I wasn't really interested. So at least once a year, people do look at Time Magazine, and there's still 3 million people who get it in their homes every week. Now, the real danger here is that the Koch brothers will try to have some influence on Time, and they have a lot of money, so they could do a lot with Time. The reason that's disturbing to me is that one of my longtime interests at Time was being environment editor. I'm very much worried about climate change because I have 2 sons, I have a grandson, I'm worried about the future. The Koch brothers, while I was editing all these cover stories about climate change, the Koch brothers were helping to finance a campaign of backlash, of disinformation. They poured money toward conservative politicians, conservative think tanks, who are putting out this message that there's no such thing as climate change, or it's nothing to worry about. So really, they were kind of fighting against my journalism all those years. Now, in fairness, I should say that the terms of the deal are that the Koch brothers are not going to have a seat on the Timing board and will have no editorial influence. They said that in the announcement of this deal. Very few people really believe that,
right,
that they're going to spend $650 million and get not much from their investment, because you know, it's not like the magazine business is the hottest.
That's what I was going to say. You're going to be making all this money?
In investment. So all the former editors that I've talked to worry about what's going to happen. So what is their long-term goal? With their resources, they could bring Time back to its glory days by pouring a bunch of money into it. But they might make Time the Fox News of magazine journalism. It could be part of a plan to legitimize the far right-wing libertarian point of view.
But isn't that point of view already legitimized when you have a Republican Congress, Speaker Paul Ryan, who aligns with the libertarian political ideology, and frankly, you have The Economist. There's a lot of conservative-leaning libertarian-ish pro-business magazines.
Editorial page of the Wall Street Journal.
So does it?
Yeah, it's certainly legitimate. Legitimized with about half the American public, but to take over Time magazine really, I think, is a step farther toward trying to achieve lasting political dominance. I don't think they're going to be able to do that, but the fact that they might try to use my long-time magazine to do that. What is so disturbing to me is I brought along several cover stories to show you. This was the first big environment cover I edited when Time named Endangered Earth Planet of the Year instead of having a Person of the Year.
What was the date on that?
That was the first issue of 1989. So that's, and I thought, well, it's obvious we have to do something about this. That's 28 years ago. Yeah. It's obvious we have to do something about this. And it was obvious. Everybody agreed we have to do something about climate change. The first President, George Bush, went to Rio. They had a world meeting, and he signed on to the first climate treaty. But then all the climate deniers got busy. The people like the Koch brothers got busy and started financing this contrarian view that climate change is nothing to worry about. Anyway, so we kept at this over the years. Here's another. This whole issue is devoted to the environment.
And this is in 1997, so
right. Here's one for 2000.
How to Save the Earth.
Here's the last one I did that shows the Earth as a fried egg in a skillet. 2001. But all this time, the deniers are putting out their alternative facts, as we now call them. So to think that there could be in the future an issue of Time that says, never mind, climate change is not that big a deal. It gives me nightmares.
And let me just read this to you. So this is April 9th, 2001. This is after Time had merged with AOL.
That's right.
So big business here. It says global warming. There's a fried egg on the cover. Climbing temperatures, melting glaciers, rising seas. All over the earth, we're feeling the heat. Why isn't Washington?
And it's still the same story. We've been in stalemate.
So I want to talk a little bit about the political ideology of Time before the Koch brothers, because Time was founded by a conservative man,
right.
Henry Luce, and
right.
his wife was at one point going to run for president. A lot of people don't
yes,
know about
Claire Boothe-Luce, yes.
She was, a screenwriter, beautiful, fascinating story if anybody ever wants to look that one up. But Henry Luce had a conservative viewpoint, and he was not afraid to use it. And the way that people are complaining that Steve Bannon used Breitbart News and other media figures, Rupert Murdoch uses Fox News, and the other media tycoons use their news
right.
outlets. This isn't new. It's not new in
That's right.
in American society. So why is it that the Koch brothers, how are they different than Henry Luce or even Steve Bannon?
I'm not against this because they are conservative, even though I'm very liberal personally. I'm against it because they're just denying science, they're denying facts. Time magazine invented the system of fact-checking. The New Yorker and all the traditional magazines have armies of fact-checkers to make sure that everything in the magazine is correct. So Time has always been based on accuracy. Yes, Henry Luce might have his opinions get in the magazine, but he couldn't have his own set of facts. Time magazine and its rival Newsweek have always been truthful publications. When you do what the Koch brothers have been doing for 20 years, denying science, you're going against the facts. It's as if you were saying, I don't believe in evolution, or the earth is flat. When you go against what 98% of scientists on earth are saying, you're just creating your own reality. And that's never been what Time magazine is about. So if the Koch brothers would try to do that with Time, it would be a total break with Time's history.
There's a generation, millennials, that under the age of 36 overwhelmingly believe that climate change is real, and it's the #1 issue that they're concerned with. Above economics, jobs, any of the cultural issues, it is climate change. So you see the Koch brothers, who, they're of the baby boomer generation, and it seems like they're desperately trying to influence the public at a time when this generation's coming of age. Do you think that this is just their last attempt to penetrate the media? I mean, I don't know how they win them over at this point.
I hope it's the last gasp. I mean, we really need to get started seriously working on climate change, and I hope the Koch brothers' generation will pass. The thing is that they have so much money, and there's so much money in the fossil fuel industry, that it's a very hard problem to solve. It's like this huge battleship that you have to turn around. And the fossil fuel industry is so well financed that it's very hard to overcome that. That's the big problem with our political system, because our Congress has been purchased by fossil fuel money and gun manufacturing money and various other sources of money, and that's why we're not getting any progress on several important issues. Probably the first thing the millennials have to do is fix the system of financing of campaigns, whether it takes a constitutional amendment or whatever it takes. It's going to have to happen.
Campaign finance is incredibly important, but we're sitting here having this conversation on the day that net neutrality was reversed, and it's undeniable that the internet and the tools that the internet have brought us has really given, listen, Bernie Sanders was the first presidential candidate to talk about campaign finance reform publicly. He had to be covered talking about campaign finance reform on CNN and MSNBC and Fox News when they didn't want to. It was the first time I knew I could ever talk about those things in the mainstream media. And part of that, is because of the internet. The internet really was what made the Bernie Sanders campaign go viral. Also, the Donald Trump campaign go viral. But now with neutrality,
it's good for you to bring that up, because the danger here is that money can become the dominant force on the internet. If companies are allowed to deliver you information at much greater speed, if they have the money to pay for that greater speed, then once again, you have an unlevel playing field, and you have the players with the money having the most influence, the most power, reaching the most eyeballs. It's a very disturbing trend, but my hope is that the conservative movement has made a fatal mistake by hitching its wagon to a personality as unstable as Donald Trump, that he's so outrageous that maybe he's going to lead the conservative movement right off the cliff. We can hope. I mean, the Republican Party, as we saw this week, has already reached the frontier of outrageousness in Alabama. Alabama elected a Democrat because the Republicans had gotten so outrageous. So that's That's a hopeful sign. That's what we can hope for, that they're just going to change metaphors, that they're just going to overplay their hand and try to do too much.
Speaking of overplaying their hand, you were at a climate meeting, decades ago, where very notable figures got together and talked about climate change. And I think what I'm shocked by is knowing very well how much time we have left. Scientists have really gotten it down as close as possible. I just don't understand why the oil and gas industry hasn't pivoted, or these investors haven't pivoted, knowing in the end, is it going to make a difference that you made profits this quarter when there's going to be no planet, or the real estate industry is going to fall apart, or it's going to cost them more money because the climate is affecting their actual industry?
Everybody thinks in the short term. If you listen to the great environmental writer Bill McKibben, he will tell you you shouldn't be investing in the oil industry because eventually people are going to realize that they can't burn all their oil reserves, and suddenly the values of their company is going to plummet. But people just really think short term, and publicly they pivoted a long time ago. I mean, many years ago, ExxonMobil admitted that global warming was a problem. That's why the Koch brothers were so important, because while the oil companies could no longer publicly deny climate change, the Koch brothers could finance all these underground think tanks who would get out the word on websites or whatever through conservative circles, so that everybody in the conservative bubble still didn't believe in climate change, even though ExxonMobil admitted there's climate change.
What's so strange to me is that they've spent so much money on brainwashing Americans, and yet, everything from purchasing magazines like Time to building websites this isn't the Koch brothers, like Breitbart, that the Fox News empire and only reports on stories that have been published in other conservative publications, that they've literally infiltrated state houses and removed climate change or any sort of climate science from school books. Yet, it's just not working when it comes to the court of public opinion in terms of the generation that's growing. Maybe older members, but I don't understand. I mean, I just don't understand how this is sustainable at this point. They have think tanks and industries and...
Well, it goes back to they own Congress. The overwhelming majority of people believe in climate change, but nothing happens because Congress has been purchased. The overwhelming majority of people believe that we need to have better regulations on guns, and that doesn't happen because Congress has been purchased. So Congress has become a fundamentally corrupt institution, and we have to change that. And maybe Doug Jones is the first victor in the new era of something different, and maybe women are going to lead the way. I'm hoping that women are seeing that the traditional conservative, male-dominated, pro-gun, anti-abortion viewpoint is just the past that we've got to get beyond, and I'm hoping women are going to lead the way. They certainly did in the Alabama election and in Virginia and New Jersey special elections, and that makes me hopeful. And I think the whole backlash against sexual harassment is part of it. I'm hoping in the future you're not going to see a Congress dominated by men who are beholden to the oil industry and the gun industry and the banking industry, and
And it's on both sides. So, you know, it's very clear on the Republican side that they're beholden to all of these interests. There are some Democrats who are still beholden to the NRA, which baffles me.
Yeah.
Just a couple.
And the banking industry.
And the banking industry is the big one, right?
Let's face it, all the money she got from giving speeches to Goldman Sachs did not help Hillary in the election.
And it didn't help working class people, and especially women who bear, you know, the burden of the economy that we're facing. So,
right.
In terms of moving Democrats when it comes to oil money and fracking money, because, you know, even though it is in the Democratic platform that the Democratic Party is against fracking, I mean, even Hillary Clinton, I think it was a couple of days after the platform was written, she went and had a fundraiser in Colorado with the largest natural gas executive. So what is it going to take for these Democrats to be moved on this when this is what they're facing? This is what they were facing 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Oh, the day when we're speaking, this will be on the internet a few days later, but the day we're speaking is the 5th anniversary of the Newtown tragedy. And so you could have, you know, 20 young children just slaughtered and still no action on gun control. So it's hard to know. I thought that Hurricane Katrina would make people get serious about climate change. That was back in 2005. I thought Superstorm Sandy might make people. So it's changed. So it's hard to know. Hopefully it'll be a generational thing. I think the millennial generation, not everybody, because there are some of the millennials who live inside the conservative bubble, but I think a larger majority of millennials understand the truth of these issues, and hopefully the dinosaurs will die off, and the mammals will
take over.
will bring on a new order.
So I hate to bring it back down, but before we go, you mentioned the hurricanes, and I was just in Puerto Rico and did some reporting there. You know, Naomi Klein writes about disaster capitalism quite a bit.
Exactly.
How
Probably my favorite author.
Mine too. Yes. We got that in common. But she has identified something that, in my mind, even if a generation does come of age, that the amount of disaster and the effects that this form of capitalism that, you know, it's sort of created by capitalism, these natural disasters and economic disasters, and then, you know, these what are they called? The vultures come in. Vulture capitalists come in and take advantage of these communities. I don't understand how you come out of that, and how you know, we're still trying to get out of Reaganomics, and it's like, let's triple down on that now that we know it doesn't work.
We need a Teddy Roosevelt, who was actually a Republican, but he knew you had to bust up Standard Oil and these big companies. History moves in cycles, and I know it's easy for a young person to get very depressed, but back in the 19th century, we had terrible child labor in this country. Things were actually a lot worse, and things did change. We had a fantastic progressive era in which a lot of laws were passed to create new labor laws, outlaw child labor, break up the big companies. So it can happen when enough people are uncomfortable. Part of the problem is that we're so distracted. Part of the strategy of the capitalists is to have bread in circuses, you know, have everybody watching football games and
Donald Trump tweets.
Donald Trump tweets, 700 cable channels.
Yeah.
We're all so distracted that we're kind of enjoying life and
Numbing.
Playing games on your phone is, once you buy the phone and you buy your plan, it's pretty cheap entertainment.
Well, that's not going to happen anymore. So maybe people will get back to their roots and start talking to their neighbors and create a revolution by knocking on doors.
Yeah, maybe when due to the lack of net neutrality,
Right.
they make the internet so expensive that hopefully they will overplay their hand. My parents, they lived through the Depression and World War II, and it doesn't get any worse than that, and they came through it. And even though it seems like we're in a very dark period, things will turn around, and you'll get a chance to be part of building this new world. Maybe one day, instead of having Sarah Huckabee Sanders stand up there saying everything is wonderful, we'll have you at the White House really giving us the real facts instead of alternative facts.
Well, we definitely need somebody in the White House giving us actual facts, and hopefully that day will be sooner rather than later. And on behalf of the Young Turks and our audience, just we're so appreciative of the work that you've done over the past several decades, especially around climate science and covering climate change before most people were even covering it, and bringing it to the mainstream and really highlighting the crisis that we're facing right now. So Charles, very appreciative.
Thank you. It's all for your future and my grandson's future.
Cross our fingers we'll be able to get through it without beachfront property in Iowa. Thank you.
If you liked this interview and you're at the end, so apparently you liked it a little bit, thank you for watching. We really appreciate it. You can watch them live as they happen if you're a member. Only members get that. Go to tytnetwork.com/join, and you get not only interviews live, you get the Young Turks live, you get Aggressive Progressive live, Old School, and all of it commercial free. Come join us right now. tytnetwork.com/join.